It was summertime, and I lived on the edge of Los Angeles. Divers like me have always loved swimming and walking underwater, along the beaches and reefs in the southwest. I have seen many underwater creatures. The fact that there were still so many species to be found always amazed me. Even more amazing to me was how different the world was down there. The day it started was around June 12th. I was with my uncle to an expedition to an undisclosed reef. I remember when I was young that my dad always said to stay around or inside the reef, but he's long gone now. He looked much like my uncle, though he was much more cautious, a bit more serious. Me and my Uncle Percy sailed around the edge of the reef, reaching a flag on a buoy. When we reached the area, we put on our suits. It wasn't like other diving suits. They weren't for swimming. They were used for walking, much like those of the 19th century's scuba gear. I found this strange, as well as how we didn't dive like usual. Instead, we used a cage. We entered the cage before its descent. I watched as the reef and the differing life forms rise above the cage. We opened the cage door with an echoing and faint crack of the rusting metal. Me and Uncle Percy slowly stumbled around the reef, watching as the eels and fish scampered away, not unlike how rabbits would do with hunters. When we were finished with the walk around the reef, we entered the cage again, but instead of going up, like I initially thought, we descended further. I knew this was unusual, but I knew there was still some reef and wildlife farther down. I waited as we descended, but as I waited, the cage just continued descending and descending, further and further. The world above seemed much larger than ever. The depths were now more foreign than ever. But little did I know, it was the most normal thing to happen to this story. The cage continued to descend until it was all dark. You don't know darkness until you have been in the true dark. The deepest darkness ever is not of space, but the darkness of our own home, our own planet, ourselves. My uncle said something to me on the radio, but I didn't remember exactly what. All I knew was that it was like he knew what was down there, like it was more familiar than home itself. I looked around the cage. Still, only darkness was around. Even the light on my helmet wasn't enough to illuminate the cage's bars that were in my only form of defense. The cage stopped. We didn't hit the ground, but the weight of the entire upper world finally set. Unlike that of any other weight, I looked around the cage, but I couldn't find my uncle. It was silent, so silent. As I looked around, I saw something, but it wasn't the light of a fish, nor a submarine. But it was darkness, darker than the sea itself. I looked at it, it looked back. I remember the feeling of eyes burning into mine, like I was watched by something that didn't exist. When I looked left and right, I knew whatever was there was still around, in front of me. All I could do was huddle down in the corner of the cage and wait for the weight of the sea to finally crush me. My uncle was gone. Where did he go? All I feel was the feeling of eyes burning into my scalp, and that a distant predator was watching, just inches away from me. The cage rose. Next thing I knew was that I was on the ship. My uncle was up there to greet me. He said he was on the ship the entire time. I didn't know how to feel. Like the familiar feel of the sea was more home than the world above. It must have been the weight of the sea and the lack of oxygen making me delirious, but it felt so real, like a memory just behind a door, or a predator right behind my eyes. Who was the person in the cage with me?